is done. We've seen Boro's return list and we're still waiting on a few things to be resolved, like, well, the manager. But while we're still waiting for Boro's thorough review to be finished and finalised, I thought today would be fun to grade every single Boro player's 2024-2025 campaign in this tier list. Now, I will stick this link to the tier list in the description so you can go and do this yourself, but it's pretty standard. We've picked all the Boro players out who've played a significant number of games this season, whether it be from August to January or January up until May, and we're going to grade them the good old way, the way I did back in school, which feels like a terrible eternity ago, with A to F. F being the worst, absolute failure, A being the best. It's going to be interesting given Boro's season, how many players actually get graded really well. It could be quite telling. So let's get started with the first Boro player being Neto Borges. So Neto, I think if you were grading him midway through the season, I think it would probably be a D. But when he stepped into that left centre-back position, I thought he was really, really good. He surprised me, and through that really tough spell of defeats where Boro were losing every week, he was the only bright spark. And he came out of it a different player and was a shining light in what was a very tough second half of the season. So for that, I'm actually going to put Neto Borges in a B. And going forward, I hope he's not put back into left back. I'd like to see him still play in that left centre back spot. Or if we go to a back five, he'd be perfect as a left centre half. But I'd give him a B. George Edmundson, he was the opposite in a sense. He was great when he was a loanee, but then when we signed him permanently, things just went pretty bad, and then after his form dropped off to begin with, he got injured and we haven't seen him since. I don't know if an E is too harsh because he was decent when he first come in, whether that was because he was playing for a contract, I don't know. I'm going to put Edmundson in a D. He's between D and E, but C is like average, and I would say he was just below average to poor. So yeah, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. It's D or E for me, but I'll put him in D for now. Micah Hamilton, that is an E. That is an E for me. He's not quite an F. He's not an absolute failure. We still have to remember he's a young player. He's got a lot of developing to do. This is his first, or Boro is his first major professional move. However, he didn't really get to grips with the level of football in the Championship. And unfortunately, hasn't done all that well in League One either. So we really need to hope and pray he can come back next season a different player, whether that's at Boro or he impresses in a loan elsewhere. But we've not really seen anything of Micah Hamilton so far. I'm not going to give him an F. I think that's a bit harsh with him, but so far he has been a bit of a disappointment, so I'm going to put him in E. Next up, we have Ben Doak. It's an A. He was absolutely fantastic when he played. He was a game changer in Boro's side, and we dropped off like crazy when he got injured, and we just didn't have an alternative option that offered anything like what Ben Doak did. You know, his pace, his width, everything. He was just, the whole dynamic of that right-hand side just fell apart once he got injured. Now, I'm not going to pretend he was perfect. There was certain spells where, you know, he was fairly ineffective in games, a little bit predictable. He did struggle. He wasn't absolutely electric every single game, but there were spells this season where he got me out of my seat, and I genuinely thought we were watching one of the best players in the league. So for me, he's done enough to be an A, and it's unfortunate that he's too good for this league. We'll probably see him in the Premier League next season and never in a Boro shirt again. But for the loan spell and the time that he was here, I absolutely loved watching Ben Doak. Brynn, I'm going to give a B. You know, again, like Borges, really. Unlucky that he got injured when he did, because a bit like Borges, he was really starting to, you know, pick up speed and do really well. Of course, he wrestled the number one spot away from Seny Dieng, looked far more reassured than Seny Dieng, and might have held down that spot. Who knows whether we'd have bothered getting Mark Travers had Brynn continued to improve. But of course, on Boxing Day, he suffered a freak injury, which has kept him out ever since. But I certainly feel like he has put himself right in the conversation to be a part of Boro's goalkeeping setup next season, whether that's as a number 2 or maybe as our number 1. Azaz, you know what? He can be hit and miss, and he can be extremely frustrating. And I guess just because he maybe didn't deliver in the big games, I'm going to put him in a B. But it feels harsh because he did knock out 23 goal contributions, which is an outstanding stat and is probably one of the best creative players in the Championship. So if it was between A and B, I'd have him in there, but I think there were too many occasions where in big games we needed Azaz to step up, and he sort of went missing too many times for me. So that's why it feels a bit harsh dropping him down from A to B, because his numbers are great. He just kind of didn't do it enough in the big moments. Tommy Conway, I am going to put him in A. I think he is probably, well, I said on the breakdown, our signing of the season, I think Tommy Conway's been absolutely fantastic. You know, he's not only had to try and carry the number 9 position on his own in the second half of last season, I still think done fairly well. You know, there were periods at the start of this season where him and Lath were competing, you know, blow for Borough's number 9, and they both look like two of the best centre forwards in the league at that point. And to be fair to Tommy Conway, he had one of the best goals per 90 in the Championship at one point. So had he stayed fully fit for the whole season, he might have been a real challenger for the Golden Boot. And we can't forget, he's only 22 years old as well. So Borough's Young Player of the Year gets in A for me, and I can't wait to see how Tommy Conway develops next season. Seny Dieng is an F. I'm afraid to say he was a bit of a disaster, really. You know, a bit of a disaster. Had, I think, just over or just less than a 50% save percentage, which actually put him 25th in a 24-team league. He was legitimately outside of the top 24 in the Championship list of goalkeepers for save percentage, and let us down massively in the first half of the season. Cost us a number of points, I'm sure, and it's only when we brought Travers and even Sol Brynn, to be fair, when we really saw how much Seny Dieng was letting Boro down in goal, and he just simply isn't a good enough goalkeeper for us. And then, of course, not only did he get dropped, he got injured and hasn't been seen since. So the season couldn't have gone much worse for Seny Dieng, in my opinion, and it might very well be the end of his Boro career. Anfernee Dijksteel's the first player I'm going to drop in C. I think he is just a very C player. You know, he has great moments, he has really, really bad moments, but he has popped up with some really, really great goals this season, but has also had the absolute runaround by a number of Championship wingers, hence why we've let him go, because he just isn't quite up to the standard. But I think it's too harsh to say Dijksteel's been great or terrible. He's just been up and down and very inconsistent, and that's why I think putting him kind of in the middle in C is fair. And Barlaser, I'm going to put in E as well. It's not really his fault so much. I just don't think he's ever suited Borough's style of play. I think his only good moment that I can recall was it at Oxford? I think he played well at Oxford. He did get his first Boro goal at QPR. So in that brief purple patch Boro had in November, Dan Barlaser did look decent, but unfortunately, I just don't think he suits Borough's system, and it's quite telling that in the second half of the season, he didn't really get a look in at all, and I do think his time at Boro is probably up this summer, so we didn't really see much of Dan Barlaser, and when we did, he didn't do all that much, so that's why I'm putting him in E. Kelechi Iheanacho. I'm only kidding, he's not going in A. In fact, he probably deserves a segment all of his own, but he's got to go in F. You know, without doubt, not only one of the worst loan signings Boro have ever made, but one of the worst signings we've ever made. He came unfit. He didn't look like he was even a footballer when he came. 1 goal and 2 assists. He'll be a signing we will be glad to see the back of, and one I hope we've forgotten about in 20 years' time. An absolute disaster. Delano Burgzorg's going in C, very much like Dijksteel. There were spells this season where Burgzorg was great, and a bit like Borges, you know, there was a period where we were struggling. He was one of the shining lights within Borough's team, but a bit like Dijksteel, Burgzorg is the epitome of a player who will dazzle you one week and have you tearing your hair out the week after. And I think there have been times in the second half of the season where he has been very, very frustrating. His performances haven't been all that great. And I think I have come to terms with the fact that he is going to be a good squad player for Boro, but not one we should be relying on starting on the left-hand side. That's why he's just in the middle. Glover I'm going to put in E. I wouldn't say he's quite as disastrous as Seny Dieng, because he's not a Championship level starting goalkeeper. When he came in, he didn't do great, but I wouldn't say he was an absolute car crash either. I think we've all just come to terms with Tom Glover being a third choice goalkeeper at best, and he might move on in the summer. Who knows, if he wants to get into the Australia World Cup team, he might want to move on, but he's not a great goalkeeper, you know, but he's not let us down as much as Dieng did, for example, so I'll just sit him in E. Marcus Forss, I'm actually going to put in D, and that's mostly because I've just been a bit disappointed by Marcus Forss. You know, again, injuries have gotten in the way of his season, but he's only returned 1 goal And I'd expect a lot more than that from Marcus Forss. And I am starting to question whether he still has the goals in him to deliver in this Boro side, and if we can also keep him fit enough to do that throughout a championship campaign. So, one whose future is maybe starting to be questioned a little bit at Boro, but I was certainly disappointed by Marcus Forss when he did play this season. Alex Gilbert, of course, a tough one to judge. He was at Boro a little bit for the start of the season. He did get injured for a while, but I'm going to put him in C for that Hull City moment alone when he did score in the final minute of the game at the KCOM, or whatever the hell they call it these days, which of course helped me witness my first ever Boro away win in the league in 10 years of travelling to watch the Boro. Yeah, that's how bad my record was, and it was this guy who gave me that moment. I don't know if it's fair to judge his loan spell at Charlton too much. He has done all right when he's played, but he's not played much. So I think the jury's out on his loan spell there, but I still like him. I still fancy him to have a good future here, and for that moment at Hull, he gets a C. Isaiah Jones is another one which is tough to really judge. I'll put him in D. You know, he was up and down in the first half of the season, Isaiah Jones, but he was typical Isaiah Jones, really. Inconsistent. A bit like Burgzorg, really. You know, he was great one moment, infuriating the next. I guess the reason why he's dropped down to D is we let him go in January, and we haven't seen him since, and probably won't see him in a Boro shirt ever again. Morgan Whittaker, unfortunately, is going to go in D, because a bit like Forss, I guess, I've just been disappointed in him. We might as well rename D for disappointing in this tier list, because for all the hype behind Morgan Whittaker, and I get, you know, there's still a lot of time for him to develop and work his way into this Boro team, and, you know, like Azaz and others who didn't hit the ground running, they come good eventually, and I do have faith Whittaker will. I just hope he can find a place in this Boro team, because, as I mentioned earlier, losing Ben Doak, it did expose what we had on the right and what Whittaker kind of doesn't offer us. He's a player who likes to come inside, and Boro need to tailor how we play to still get the best out of the team, and Morgan Whittaker with his strengths coming in central, because sadly that was one of the reasons why Boro was so blunt going forward in the second half of last season, because we were so narrow and we didn't have the width, and that's kind of down to the players we had playing. Morgan Whittaker was one of them. He only registered 1 assist, no goals. You'd expect a lot more from him, and I pray he can do better next season, but I can't justify giving him any higher than a D. Hayden Hackney is an A, undoubtedly my Boro player of the season. He's just outstanding, Hayden Hackney, and I know there's times where he might frustrate fans, but he is by far the best technically gifted player in this Boro team, and there's a reason why he has had Premier League teams sniffing around him for a long time, and a reason why I think he's played his last game in a Boro shirt. We'll never see him ever again at Middlesbrough. He's a Premier League player in waiting, and he's just brilliant. One of the best progressive passers, if not the best progressive passer in all of Europe. He's outstanding, and I think he's another one. He's like Marcus Tavernier, many other Boro players who've came and gone, who I don't think Boro fans will realise just how good he was until after he's gone. Dael Fry is a tough one. Again, he's been injured. He's been in and out like a lot of Boro's defence. He did look good for a spell when he did come in initially, but I think it's one of them with Dael Fry. I wouldn't say he's put that much of a foot wrong. He's just been hindered by injuries, as of a lot of Boro defenders. So I'm going to put him in C. I don't think he's been disappointing as such. I'd say that's more of a collective when it comes to Boro's defence, and we are just shackled by the lack of fitness throughout all of Boro's centre-halves. But I still, at the same time, wouldn't say he's pulled up any trees and done anything all that special this season. So I'd stick Fry right in the middle, and I'd put him in C. Luke Ayling, I'm going to drop into D. Again, another player, running theme here, who's been stricken with injuries. But even then, when he did play this season, he's a shadow of the player he was the season before. You know, when he was getting forward, the assists he was getting the season before, we really thought we'd struck gold with Luke Ayling, but his age catching up with him maybe this season, you know, struggling a little bit up against some of the left-sided players like Enzo Latte, who absolutely tore him a new one. I think we are starting to see him maybe dropping off a little bit when it comes to being a starting right-back at championship level, and of course another player whose injuries have been hindering him. So I wouldn't say he's been that bad that he deserves any lower, but I do wonder what his future will hold for Boro going forward next season, with us having to buy right-backs in that position. Yeah, who knows what the future holds for Luke Ayling at Boro. Jonny Howson, I'm going to put in B. I know a lot of people adore Jonny Howson, and I really like him as well. I do feel like some of the love is a little bit too much. I think there's a lot of sentiment when it comes into Jonny Howson. And listen, he is a captain, he's a great leader, he is a legend. I think legend's overused when it comes to football, but I can't deny how good of a job he's done, you know, coming into the team, playing at centre-half, stepping in to a position that's not his natural, and him doing just as good of a job, you know, as any of our other centre-halves. I've seen some people say he's the best centre-half at the club. I wouldn't say that. I think that's a little bit over the top, but he's certainly no worse than the other centre-halves, I would say, and he did a great job when he stepped in to that centre-back position, holding his own at his age. I thought he was absolutely great. I can't quite give him an A because there was a large period of the season where he was injured and he didn't play. So I wouldn't say he's quite an A because we didn't see his performance consistently throughout the season. But I think when he stepped in, he did a great job, and that's why he's worthy of being a B. Mark Travers, A. Absolute game changer. As I mentioned earlier, the upgrade on Seny Dieng when we saw Mark Travers come in was absolutely huge. He had the third best save percentage in the Championship, only behind James Trafford and Michael Cooper, so the two best goalkeepers by a mile in two of the potentially three newly promoted teams, or three promoted teams depending on what happens with Sheffield United. But yeah, for him to be right up there shows how great of a goalkeeper he is, and he saved us a huge number of points, and what ended up being quite a dismal end of the season could have looked a lot worse without Mark Travers. So I don't think we'll get a goalkeeper this season as good as him. I certainly hope we can somehow, because we're not going to see him back at Boro, which is an absolute shame. But while he was here, it was fantastic to have a top goalkeeper again in Mark Travers. Emmanuel Latte, I'm going to put B. I think we can't disregard, of course, yes, he was a big loss when he left, and yes, that was a hole that we never filled, and we could clearly see that we were a weaker side without Emmanuel Latte. However, as great as he was for a spell, there was that 8-9 game barren spell after the summer transfer window, ironically enough, in September and October, where he couldn't hit a barn door. And that's something that I can't quite forget about. So I wouldn't say he's been consistent. He was like a Lath, he was up, he was down, but when he was on it, he was absolutely on it. And it's a shame he left when he did, because if it had continued, he'd have been a 20-plus goal scorer, I'm sure, for Boro, and would definitely be an A. But he left early, of course. Doesn't sound like it's going all that well for him in the MLS either, but yeah. Emmanuel Latte would have been an A, left early, had a barren spell, and that's why he's in B. Lukas Engel, I'm going to put in F. I am, and I think that's just because the only significant thing Lukas Engel did this season was come on in the League Cup game against Stoke, have an absolute shocking second half where we conceded, was it 3 or 4 goals, lost 5-0, and was never seen again. He was then loaned out to the MLS, and I don't think we'll see him in a Boro shirt ever again. So it just compounded what's been a disappointing spell for Lukas Engel at Boro, and I think when you can only pick out a really negative performance, and we didn't see much of him after that, he was dropped for Borges, then he was sent out on loan. Bit of a disastrous season for Lukas Engel, and it might be the end of his Boro career. That's why he's in F. Samuel Iling-Junior is a tough one. I think he struggled when he first come in, but once Boro found out his best position, we saw glimpses of what he could do, but I don't think it's quite enough to justify a B. I'm going to put him in a C, a high-end C, I would say. We saw great glimmers like the Oxford game, I think, where he put 2 outstanding balls into the box, and we saw what his delivery was capable of, but I think at the same time, he's not naturally a left-back. I think he's more a left wing-back, and he did struggle defensively at times in that left-back position, and that's not his fault. That was just down to Boro and the options we left ourselves with our defence getting neglected in January in the way it was. So that's why I can't quite put him in a B, but he was a decent loan signing, and I'm sure if played in his right position, he'd have been outstanding for us. But sadly, another player we won't see back at Boro, Iling-Junior, is a C. And I'm going to put Rav in C as well. I think alongside Dael Fry, I can't differentiate the two too much. Again, injuries hindered him all season. But I do think there is a part of me that would have put Rav in D, just because I think we expect a little bit more of Rav compared to the other centre-halves. He's a young player. We think he's going to be a superstar. And I think his heightened expectations maybe leave us feeling a little bit more disappointed by his performances this season. So that's why you could put him in D, but I think, injuries have gotten in the way, but he still has been underwhelming, I would say, from what we expect from him. Whether that hinders a summer move or not, I don't know. I really am 50-50 on whether he'll be here in August or not. But yeah, not the best season for Rav. That's why he's in the middle. Ryan Giles, unfortunately, it's not quite an F, but it's certainly an E. It's a signing that just didn't work. I think we were maybe seeing slight glimmers. I remember in the Sunderland game he looked pretty good, and he was very unlucky with the own goal. I started to see glimmers as well towards the end of the season when he started to come back into the team, but it was quite telling that a player who Michael Carrick absolutely loves got dropped and couldn't get in the team ahead of a player like Samuel Iling-Junior, who's not even naturally a left-back. So we could all kind of see it. Ryan Giles has had a torrid 18 to 24 months, and it would have took longer than I think a 6-month loan spell for him to really find his top form again. Whether he comes back, who knows? Carrick might still think he can get the best out of him, and a pre-season and everything might finally see the best of Ryan Giles again in the next season if we do sign him, but there's no question his loan spell was massively disappointing, and that's why he's an E. Matt Clarke's a tough one to judge, but I am going to put him in C. I think there was a point at the start of the season where Matt Clarke was our best player, and he was our top goal scorer in August, September. He got a few goals from a few set pieces, and I still stand by he was one of our better defenders. And when we had an injury crisis at the start of the season, he was one of our best, most reliably fit centre-halves. And then we sold him, which I thought was really disappointing, and I never quite understood why Carrick started picking Edmundson over Matt Clarke, and then when Dael Fry come back and he was straight over Matt Clarke, he just never fancied him. For whatever reason, whatever was going on there, it led to Matt Clarke leaving, of course, and it's a it's a big shame because I don't think he's any worse than what we've got, and we never replaced him either, which was a real big shame. So had he stayed, I think he could have been one of our standout centre halves and maybe been in B, but because he left so early, unfortunately, he sits in C. Riley McGree, massively disappointing season. I can't justify putting him any higher than E. It's not down to his ability. It's simply down to his injuries. He's barely played all season. He's probably the player in this list that's played the least. But we saw glimpses of him at the start of the season. But he's just had injury after injury after injury. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter how good you are. Unless you sort your injury issues out, you're pretty much irrelevant and useless to the team. So I beg and hope that he can get himself fit, because when he's fit, I still believe he's one of Borough's most technically gifted footballers. But it's whether he can get himself fit or not. So that's why, not down to his ability, but down to his availability, I've put Riley McGree in E. And finally, we've got Aidan Morris. I'm going to put Aidan Morris, I'm going to put him in A. I think he's had a very good first season in the Championship. And let's not forget, Aidan Morris had played non-stop since February. The February before this season started, he played all the way through the MLS season, came straight to Boro. He acclimatised and hit the ground running really, really well at Boro. I think he did really, really well. He had an injury. Maybe he wasn't quite the same player when he got back from that injury, but I still felt like we were starting to see improvements from him towards the end of the season, and I just think he's a great player. His reading of the game in midfield, he's great at winning the ball back, retaining possession, and I think sometimes it's more down to Boro's style of play why our midfield gets so overrun so easily. I wouldn't say it's down to the personnel so much, and I think next season it'll be very interesting to see what part Aidan Morris plays when he's going to be without his partner in crime in Hayden Hackney. So there's my tier list of Boro players. More in the A's and B's than I expected, but you could say there's equally as many that are in the sort of average D and E, and you'd ideally not want any Fs, and the fact we've got 3 is quite damning. So I think that just paints a picture that it was a mixed bag. A very mixed bag, some really good stuff, some really bad stuff, and that sums up Boro. Up one week, down the next, inconsistent, and that's why we finished where we were. But as I say, let me know your thoughts and feelings in the comments where you'd grade every single Boro player in this tier list. And as I mentioned at the start, there will be a link in the description for you guys to go and try this out yourself. Hopefully that will be public and that will be working. So try it out, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to send me a tier list, you can find me on X and on TikTok, links in the description via my link tree. But until next time, guys, if you've liked the video, smash a like on the video, subscribe for more, and I'll see you all in the next one.